shop. We lived 18 miles out. I grew up on a 3,000-acre sheep station. We had about 5,000 head of sheep. I was the youngest of 7 children. My next sibling up is 3.5 to 4 years older than me. So in my estimation, I was an oops, but I'm a great oops. I'll say that myself anyway. But by the time I came along, my parents had had enough of children. So literally from the youngest age, from being just tiniest little kid, I was kicked outside. And I spent all my formative years, those years between about 9 months when I could move independently around in either all fours or wobbling on 2 legs, till I was 5, and then chuffed up off to school, which was kind of a nasty interruption to my actual education, which was what was happening on our sheep station as I was growing up. And I was given an enormous amount of freedom to explore our property. I had a horse and a dog, and they were my 2 companions that I would go everywhere. And you probably know from TV shows and your children that Australia is the home of some of the most deadliest snakes. And we have deadly spiders, and we have scorpions, all of which lived on our property. We had 3 of the 5 world's deadliest snakes lived on our property. Spiders that would put you in hospital for months on end. We had scorpions, and I survived. And when I got older and started the work that I did, I started to think back a lot on my childhood and my upbringing and what I learned about who I am, what I learned about resilience, what I learned about adaptability, what I learned about kind of creating a future for myself, really all happened and started in the times when I was a small child. And I think back, and one of the questions that I asked, and I pondered about this, why did I not get bitten by a snake or bitten by a spider or taken away and dragged down the bush by a dingo and buried in some hole, or a kangaroo? Kangaroos can drag you off as well. They're not furry, cuddly looking things that you all think kangaroos are. And I really started to come to the realization that as a very young child, I started to create a connection to the natural world and a connection to my environment in a very, very, very strong way. In that, I would sense danger before the danger came close enough to me to create a problem. I can remember as a small child, like running through long grass and literally stopping with my leg halfway in the air and realizing that if I'd taken another step, I would have put it on top of a snake and backed off straight away. There's a fellow from Ohio at university there, E.O. Wilson. He coins this concept of like the 6th sense as biophilia. And it's kind of like a sense of an awareness of an acute awareness of your environment. So I kind of use the analogy of teaching kids how to sail. So one of my careers was working in a summer camp, and my job was, I had 12, 16-year-old lads for 8 weeks, and they were urban kids, and I had to basically transfer them from urban kids to kids that were completely independent, self-reliant, knew what they needed to do, and also had some pretty good and amazing skills. So I taught them to sail. And when I first started doing it, I didn't realize that the outcome I was going to get would be as profound as what it ended up being. So if you imagine you want to sail, and some of you may be sailors, I'd ask you to put up your hands, but I can't see any of you, so I'm not going to ask for that. But if you imagine, if you are going to be a really good sailor, you have to be completely in tune with your body. You have to understand your weight. You have to understand your movement. You also have to be completely in tune with your environment. There's no signs out there that say, this is the direction of the wind, or in 2.5 seconds, you're going to get a gust of wind, be prepared. You have to start to look at the ripples on the water. You have to kind of feel the air on your cheek or on the back of your hand. You've got to kind of understand your environment to be able to move forward in a sailboat. And then when you are moving forward, you need to understand the weight of your body is going to change the trajectory of the boat, the balance of the boat. Pulling the sheet in, letting the sheet go, allows the sail to come in and out. You end up not actually thinking about any of this. You actually end up dreaming about something else, or looking at the birds, or just looking at the shore and just enjoying being out there, because your environment becomes part of who you are. And that's in some ways what I mean by this concept of biophilia. It's that connection, direct connection to your environment. So you're sitting there wondering, thinking, I thought this was all about play. And he's talking all about the environment, how the environment adapted and changed and developed him when he was a young child. And then it kind of had impact later on in my life. Most of what I did to learn all of this was actually through play. It was all independent creative play that I created play by myself, or I'd play, if I was lucky, with my brothers, because I had three other brothers that tended to be mostly annoyed when I came around. But every now and then I did get to play and build forts and build billy carts. And I don't know whether any of you understand the term billy cart. It's a apple box attached to a piece of wood, attached to four wheels, and you sit in it and somebody pushes you from the top of the hill and you go barreling down the hill at 100 miles an hour with no safety net whatsoever. So we would build billy carts, and but it was all basically play. There were no adults involved in any aspect of my early childhood. Actually, in some ways, they were, for me, really unnecessary. I was learning everything I needed to learn through doing, creating, building, and working outside in the natural environment. So in modern society, I hear a lot of people, a lot of schools, a lot of policyholders saying that, you know, children's play, that's for a separate time, and they need to be organized, and we need to structure them, and we need to have them doing things because the kids get bored really, really quickly. And we need to really, in other words, program our kids. And the reality is the exact opposite is true. So I'll ask you all a question. So when your child is 21, 23, 25, and they're out in the world and they're about to work, they need very, very, very much to be able to do a couple things. The first one they need to be able to do is they need to be independent thinkers. The second that they need to be able to do is they need to be able to be self-reliant. In other words, get up in the morning at 7 o'clock, clean their tooth, have a shower, do what they need to do, and then get to work. And when they get to work, they need to be absolutely and completely prepared to be at work. They need to be able to monitor themselves, so to kind of look after their own emotions. So if something bad happens, it doesn't completely destroy their day. And there's a few other traits. I won't necessarily go into all of them, but these are called executive functions. And as an adult, we need executive functions to be the creator, to be the initiative person, to be the leader, to be all those things in the workforce of the 21st century. The follower in the 21st century is going to get left behind. It's really the creator, the inventor. If you really want to get ahead, they're the things that you're really going to need, the skills you're going to need. Where do you get those skills? You don't get them from learning math. You don't get them typically from memorizing curriculum. You actually get those skills from being creative, and mostly you get them from play, and play, either independent play or play within a group. And when I use the term play, I'm not talking about a soccer team, I'm not talking about tennis, and I'm not talking about a swim team. I'm actually talking about play where there is no structure, where you have to completely create from scratch. So let's take a scenario of a group of young girls and they're playing hide and seek. So, and they're 6 years old, 7 years old, younger ones. So first of all, they've got to come up with rules. And let's say there's 6 young ladies and they're playing. They've got to come up with the rules. And the first one's going to suggest, I think you need to count to 10 before you can come and seek. And another one says, you know, that's not long enough for me to be able to hide. I think you need to count to 30 before you come and seek. And then they agree. So what's happening just there is societal formation, political negotiation, ideas are being transferred back and forth, and also understanding, listening, communicating is happening. Just in that, just to decide whether to play the game and what the rules are going to be. Then the students will start to play the game, and as they play the game, the rules will get much more sophisticated. For example, you can only hide, I don't know, under a green bush. I'm making this up as I go along. You can only hide under a green bush, or you can only hide within 20 yards of where I am. Now, something else also happens in that scenario, and that is people, young people who don't follow the rules and who break the rules and don't follow what has been set up by the community. And typically, that scenario follows them through to adulthood. The learning that they do in these younger years are so ingrained as far as their understanding of how society works, how communication works. Those things are really developed and honed in young children. So typically also, children that break the rules, the others also will tend not to want to play with them. And that is also a good learning opportunity for those, because they start to realize that to play and to work in a society, you either have to do one or two things. You either go along with the rules that have been set, or you offer an alternative to the rules and hope the group agrees to those alternatives. Once again, what's happening in that child's brain is the development of understanding of how to negotiate, how to make people believe or follow what you want to do, and also the creative aspect of it. So that's your typical group game. So now let's think about a typical individual game. And it's really important. A lot of people get worried about their child playing by themselves. In actual fact, independent play by themselves is as important as group play. And the reason that I'm saying this is because there are a couple of things that'll happen. Actually, right now is a perfect example of why independent play is really important. We are now societally ostracized from each other. I live on a farm all by myself with goats and chickens and whatever. I don't get to see a lot of people. And if I was somebody who craved being with other people because I never spent time by myself, I did not learn how to self organize my day to be able to be creative by myself, that would be really, really difficult. And I know there are people who are probably really struggling because those skills when they were younger weren't developed in play, individual play. They spent a lot of time with other people and they never really had time to understand how to create by themselves, how to self-soothe when they're by themselves, how to come up with an idea and then follow through with it. Typically, adults, and I'm going to make a statement before this. One is adults have no business in children's play. I'm going to say that again. Adults have no business in children's play. Because what happens when adults get involved in children's play is they tend to organize or save the child from failure, which is also an incredible learning opportunity. And if we keep saving them, they'll never actually get to learn. And adults tend to take over a little bit. And adults have a lot less patience than children. And children's time, when they look at time is when I'm done. Adults look at a time and it's like, okay, the watch, we've got 15 minutes and we're done. So adults need to stay away from play. But what happens is, if a child is bored, let's say the child, you've left your child and they say, Mom or dad, I'm bored. The first thing you do is you create something for the child. So you've actually disabled your child. You've taken away the opportunity for your child to create for themselves. So the best thing to do is say, okay, and go about your business. Ignore it. They're going to come back and say, I'm bored. They might do it 10 times. But it's like training a puppy dog. You got to keep at it and at it and at it. If you keep saying, just don't engage, just go, oh, okay. Your child will eventually get bored with asking you because they're not getting what they need from you. And they will go off, and in 20 minutes, half an hour, you'll wonder where they are, and they've gone off and started to create something. Now, if they've gone off and started to create something destructive, you might want to say, I think it's time to choose something different than painting on the wall. But allowing them the opportunity, or forcing them, unfortunately, the opportunity to create for themselves by not creating for them. Screen time is now going to start to become an issue for a lot of young people. And there is an enormous amount of danger in over screen timing. I'll give you a couple of statistics. One which is pretty profound in China. The Chinese children, and now young people, teenagers and young adults, are having an extreme difficulty with their eyes. They are extremely short-sighted. I'm hoping I've got the short-sighted right. They can only see close. And the research has discovered the reason they can only see close is because they've never had the opportunity to see the horizon. Anthropologically, when children grow up, one of the things that tests their eyes is they're constantly looking at the horizon and then looking close. And their eyes visually and mechanically are going long distance, short distance, long distance, short distance constantly. Screen time buries your eyes into short distance. And if you're living in a building all the time, you're only ever seeing everything close up. So your adaptation of being able to see distance is completely diminished. So that's one of the issues with screen time. The other issue with screen time, and I don't know whether you noticed this, I don't watch a lot of TV. I have a young friend that I watch some TV with, and I watch the cartoons. And some things that I've noticed in cartoons that I don't remember from my childhood, and maybe think about it in this way. The cartoons that I watch right now change activity within 4 seconds. It actually changes what they're doing every 4 or 5 seconds. The speed of which activity moves is extremely short. It goes bang, 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 bang. Compare that to Mr. Rogers, who took half an hour just to take his shoes off or his sweater off. So imagine what that's doing to a child's brain in the way of focus and concentration. If my brain is completely being trained constantly to move from one thing to the next thing to the next thing immediately, my brain is not being trained, or the neurons are not being stretched in the area of focus. Mr. Rogers was a perfect example of being able to train the brain for long periods of focus. And when you watched Mr. Rogers, even though he took a long time to take his shoes off, in some ways you were mesmerized by that timing. It wasn't just like, oh, he's boring, come on, get the shoes off and get on with this. There was a whole methodology of him taking his shoes off and his red sweater and hanging it up. So children were given the opportunity to slow down, to focus, to be able to take the time. And unfortunately, modern TV doesn't, and cartoons are not training our kids in that way. And that's why we need to get them off the screens and get them into play that is slow moving, that is creative. So I'm a parent and I have 2 kids, and I'm thinking, okay, how do I, he's talking about this creativeness, he's talking about learning your executive functions and all these things that I want my child to be able to do. How do I set up my environment? How do I set up my house so that it is able to kind of promote this kind of play? The first thing I would suggest is anything with batteries, get rid of. And the reason that anything with batteries tend, anything that tells you what to do with it, like a toy that you turn it on and it goes around in a circle, or you turn it on and it does something for you, taking away that creative ability. Because already whoever designed the toy is already telling the child, this is what you do with me. Now play. And you can only do this and keep going. And the reality is children get bored very quickly with that style of play. Once they've mastered it or once they've done it, they don't want to keep repeating that. They may repeat it twice, 3 times, but then they get very bored with it. And that's why you notice kids have to be supplied with toys constantly, because toys that are designed to do very specific things get boring very, very, very quickly to young children. And they've got to move from one to the next. So what I would suggest you do is to start to think about this concept of loose parts. And that is just bits and pieces, like the old Meccano set, Legos, Kepler blocks, things that are, that don't say this is what you do with me. They say you need to take me and then create something. You need to take me and you need to build something from me. Or you need to use this to do something that you need to use. Games that create, like card games, if getting kids to play card games is another great way to get their brain moving, social interaction with each other, thinking about how numbers go together, how to add up numbers, things like that. There are other kind of simple ideas, but it's really this concept of looking at your child's environment and taking out all the things that say, this is what you do with me, and then trying to create an environment that is inspirational, that has materials I can create with, colored pencils, paper, newspaper they can use to fold with, things that they can build with, crates. These are all indoor activities that I'm talking about at this time, but things that they can create and build for themselves. The same is true in your outside environment. If I was doing a slideshow, I'd show you how many of you remember the old slippery dip, the old slide where you'd climb up the tall ladder and then you would slide on down the slide. And then what did you do next? You climbed up the ladder, then you slid down the slide. And then what you did next, you climbed up the ladder and slid down the side, and on. And eventually you got very bored with that. And then you started to use that slide in a manner of which it was actually becomes dangerous, because it was not designed for any other use other than to climb up the ladder and slide down. And most of us get pretty sick of that pretty quickly. So thinking about your outdoor environment, having shovels, not plastic shovels. The toy industry was brilliant. They designed all this material so that kids could copy their parents, except they made it out of plastic. And I'd like to have you sit down and put a nail in a piece of wood with a plastic hammer and see how far you get. And these children were basically abused by given plastic saws and plastic hammers and plastic shovels, of which they couldn't do anything with other than pretend. And the reality is, pretending doesn't get you anywhere. Let's actually use the real thing. So I'm presuming most of your children are in Montessori school. So I'm presuming that most of you walked into a Montessori classroom when you first joined Seton or you first went to school, and you looked around the classroom and you go, oh my God, my kid's gonna have a field day in here. He's gonna have all this stuff on the floor. He's gonna be running around with a red rod, beating other kids over the head. There, good luck. Here's my kid, see you later. And then you came back 4 weeks later and all these materials are being used beautifully. The shelves are magnificent. There's no stuff on the floor. It's because one of the root philosophies of Montessori is that we have materials, we have tools, we teach you how to use them, we teach you to respect them. Once you respect them and you know how to use the tool, no matter what the tool is and no matter what age, you can use that tool. As long as the tool is your size and that you have something that you're going to use that tool for. Shovels that have metal spades on them so they can actually dig in the ground. Hammer with real nails, a real saw. Now you're thinking, my kid's going to saw his finger off. The reality is, if you spend time with your child, teach them how to use the tool appropriately, teach them how to respect the tool. Montessori classrooms, we use sharp knives to cut up vegetables. Your children aren't coming home with only 3 fingers. They're learning how to use the tools. They're learning how to respect the tools. Every tool has a specific job. One of the things I notice, I work a lot with teenagers in our environmental ed program. And we're out on the farm or we're out in the woods and we've got shovels and saws. They have no idea how to use a shovel and how to use a lever, how to use, they use a shovel and then eventually they break the handle. And I realized the problem is not that the handle was weak. It's they're using the shovel to do something that it was not designed to do. I tell the kids that my father had 2 shovels for his entire life, 60 years on the farm, and he used it every day and he never broke one handle because he used the right tool for the right job. And these are the things that we need to be teaching our kids. All the way down to, I'm going to throw something out here at you all that kind of gets me a little bit, and that is a knife and fork at the dining room table. The fork was designed to be held in a very specific way, except here in the United States, I very rarely see it used in the manner of which it was designed. Sorry, but I just kind of had to throw that out there. But that's what I'm talking about. It's basically all these equipment that you want the kids to use, the materials that you want the kids to build with. You have to spend the time and teach them how to use it. They'll want to learn. They will be 100% with you when you're teaching them. And then they're going to want to get more tools. And that's great. And they will help you build. They will help you garden. They will help you dig in the garden. Most kids, most parents say, go out, we want you to help in the garden. They have no idea what to do, so they don't want to do it. They just look at the garden and think, that's just hard work out there. But if they had tools that you were able to teach them how to use, they would actually get out and enjoy doing those kind of things. One of the things that you can do in the backyard is go to Home Depot or your lumber store and get a whole bunch of offcuts of timber, if you can get it, or you buy them or whatever, that they can start to build with, to build a cubby with, to build, I don't know, a racetrack with. Get some old guttering that they can put together and have water run down the guttering, that can find how water flows from one gutter to the next gutter and how gravitation moves water down. These are the things that will engage your children for hours and hours and hours. And they won't want to come in for dinner because they'll be still out there when it gets dark. And quick, what time is it? Because my screen doesn't have a time on it.
It's 8:37. We've got until 9 o'clock.
Great. Just give me a timing thingy and I'll keep going. So probably the next aspect that I want to talk to you about is we're in a situation right now where our kids are really put in a place that is not really designed, is stay at home. And it's kids are born to run around, they're born to move, and a lot of this movement is now being curtailed. And as parents, you have to start to really think about, how am I going to get my kid to exercise? How am I going to get that energy out? And I will tell you, if you don't get the energy out, you're going to start pulling your hair out of your head because they're going to drive you nuts. So a couple of things that will that you can start to do with your children that will support their physical being and their energy being, and also their hand-eye and neuronic connection. So I'll give you an example. Let's say I want to throw a tennis ball to my friend who's 20 yards away. So imagine the mechanics and the neuronic work that needs to happen to get the ball from my hand into my friend's hand as I throw it. So I have to use the correct amount of trajectory with my arm, in other words, force. I have to let the ball go at the exact right time so that it arches through the air into my friend's hand. Because hopefully my friend doesn't have to move to catch it. So if you think about that, just start to think about the mechanics of that. For a lot of us adults, we seem to think that's second nature, because for a lot of us, depending on how old you were, playing catch, jump rope, things like that were things that we did. Kids aren't doing that anymore. And you will get middle school kids who actually don't have the wherewithal to be able to skip rope or to be able to throw a tennis ball so it actually hits another hand, or to be able to catch a tennis ball. Sports can do this, but simple activities at home can also do this as well. Playing catch with your kid, especially younger kids, starting at about 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and doing that every day is extremely important for hand, eye, and brain coordination. The brain needs to know that at every moment where the hand is, and connecting the hand to the brain by doing things like catch and being able to catch a ball is a really great physical activity. And it's going to support your child's ability to do handwriting, gross motor, and fine motor skills. So playing catch every day, really important skill. Skip rope, another really, really important skill. Imagine when that rope spins around you and it goes down to the ground, and then you have to jump at the exact right time to allow the rope to pass underneath your feet, and then go up on the other side and around over your head and then back down again and jump. And I'll guarantee it'll take you a week to 2 weeks to get your kid to start to be able to jump, then to be able to jump on one leg, and then to be able to skip jump. A lot of you may remember the old rhymes that they used to sing to skip jump. These were not activities that were just random activities. These were activities that were really, really important for the development of children's ability to be able to jump, skip, and then connect the feet, the legs, the hand, and the arm to the brain. Brain research now, the neuronic research that's happening now, and because we've got MRIs and these amazing machines that can look into the brain and see what the brain is doing, it's discovering that these activities are crucial for the development of the brain. Our neurons need to be flexed, especially in early childhood. And the more that you flex them with things like building, creating, jumping, catching, running, rolling, skipping, crawling, all these things are really, really important for the development of the child's connection of the brain to the body. Probably not a lot of you have teenagers. Maybe some of you do, I'm not quite sure. If most of you don't, you're in for a rude surprise when your child gets to be a teenager. Because what is going to happen is your 14-year-old, your 15-year-old, and your 16-year-old is going to act like your 3 and 4 and 5-year-old. And you'll go, what just happened? Why is my kid retroing back to early childhood? In anthropological developmental stages, this is a really important stage in the development of the human. The teenage body is growing in all directions. And one of the things that happens for teenagers is that while they're sleeping, their body grows. So when they wake up in the morning, where their reach was yesterday, it's not the same. It's actually longer today. That's why they're so clumsy, because they're learning that they're learning where the new parts of their body are in relationship to the rest of their body. Montessori saw this extremely clearly, and she felt that what we need to be doing with teenagers is we need to send them out to the farm. And the reason she wanted them to do that is she wanted them to work. She wanted them to work on a farm. So in working every day, they're learning how their body's growing. They're understanding their body because they're using their body. In modern society and traditional schools, unless you're in athletics, typically you aren't using your body that much. So therefore, you're going to school every day, your body's growing, you're gangly, and you become clumsy. And then when you become clumsy, you become very, very self-conscious. The pimple on your forehead doesn't help as well, but you become very self-conscious of your body because you don't understand it and you perceive everybody else doesn't understand it. So even for older kids, doing a lot of these activities are also really, really, really important to be able to understand their body and understand their relationship within space. And those things are really important for the younger child as well. So as your child grows up, the more you are able to get them out into nature, to get them out into the environment as a family, the stronger your family unity will become. And you're going to need that unity when they become adolescent, because you're going to want them to get outside with you. You're going to want them to be able to go hiking with you. And if you haven't done that up until that stage, it's not going to happen. They're just going to look at you like you've got three heads and say, no, I'm not going anywhere with you. So getting some of these activities early on, even if it's just going for a hike around the block as a family in the evening before dinner, as a tradition. There are countries like South Africa, I don't know if anyone here is from South Africa, they have this wonderful tradition in the evening before dinner. In Australia, we had this tradition where we got together as a family and we did something as a family. Typically, we had cheese and crackers and drinks and then went for a walk, for a hike down to the creek or kind of did something as a group. Creating those traditions with your family are really, really important, because you're going to need those traditions when your children get to be being teenagers. Playing together, playing card games together, getting some of those Monopoly sets, things like that, those kind of activities, especially now that kids are stuck on screen time during the day. After the end of school, 3 o'clock, when they're done on the screen, you need to get them off the screens and you need to be getting them to be doing other activities, jigsaw puzzles, anything you can get to engage them in activities. And typically, especially for younger children, playing board games and playing a game with mum or dad, playing with their brothers and sisters is actually something that they really, really will enjoy doing. So trying to get some of those traditions. I know it's hard being a parent. You've got work, they've got their things to do. So trying to set things up early, maybe make weekends a priority of no screen time on the weekend and do something as a family. Because during the week, our kids are really right now suffering with, especially Montessori kids that are not used to being on screens at all. They're used to using their hands and manipulating. We're now trying to work very, very hard to continue that, but we have to connect. And unfortunately, we're connecting through the screen. So I wanted to get an opportunity to have some question and answer. And I know there's 18 chats and I haven't had a look at them yet. And I'm just going to pull them up. Get rid of that. So folks are adding in some suggestions. So if you look at your question boxes there, let's go up. Yeah, Elizabeth talking about nature literacy is really important. A quick fact on literacy. In the 1960s, about 85% of children's literature was based on natural themes. A study was done about 3 years ago, 3.5 years ago. It's now only about 8% of literature is based on natural themes. So there were two things I was going to talk about, and I think I might just throw them in because that's kind of led off to. One is, there are two hypotheses that I've been really looking at. One is this idea of children being connected to bacteria very, very early on. And the things that typically we run around and disinfect. So imagine your gut. Your gut is an incredibly important organ in our body. Our children's guts are really, really, really important. And the reason they're important is because our immune system comes from our gut. Pretty much everything comes from our gut. Our gut is supported by what we take in, the food that we eat and the environment that we ingest. The stronger our gut, the stronger our immune system. So imagine a little baby at the age of 4 months, 5 months, and they've discovered their hand and they've discovered their grasp. What is the very first thing they start to do? They grasp something and they shove it in their mouth. I started thinking about that and I realized that why anthropologically would humans be designed to shove things into their mouth? Like random dirt on the ground, sticks, berries, anything the kid can find, because typically most of our kids now are containerized kids, but way back when they were on the ground, and most of the time on the ground, except nature decided that nature was going to make every kid stick anything they could find in their mouth. They were building their immune system. They were strengthening their gut to be able to withstand the environment that they had to live in. What's happening nowadays is we're sanitizing our gut and we're sanitizing our environment so that our kids are starting to grow up either allergic or unable to withstand even the slightest variances of our environments. And that's because we haven't allowed our kids when they're really young to put things into their gut. There is a catalyst to this. The modern world has created things that we may necessarily not wanting to be put into our mouths. We all understand that. So we have to avoid those items. But most items are things that that children need to be putting in their gut, and we need not to be sanitizing everything so they can build that immune system. So there's a professor from Australia who has been studying early childhood, and he's been studying children that have had more exposure to diarrhea, more exposure to animal feces. In other words, they've had a pet dog, or they've lived on a sheep farm, or they lived on a cow farm. They're exposed to animal feces, have grown up to have less incidence, there's a good word for it, less incidence of Alzheimer's, less incidences of dementia, and less incidences of autoimmune diseases. And I started thinking about that, and I realized that's pretty profound. That the reality is, when little children put their environment into their gut, they're building those immune systems. And anthropologically, if you look at children anthropologically, they were on the ground. They were picking up all the things that were around them and they were shoving them into their mouths. I was watching a podcast last night And this fellow said two things that I thought were pretty profound. He said, anthropologically, culturally, we have caught up. But anthropologically, as far as our DNA and our development, we are way behind. So if you think of an animal that needs to adapt to an environment, typically it takes multiple generations of a little adaptation, a little more of adaptation. Those that don't have the adaptation, they die off. And those with the adaptation, they become stronger. Then they have an offspring that have that adaptation. And then they survive, the stronger survive. Humans are, if you imagine, when I was a little kid, we had a party line telephone. I didn't have a TV. I had no idea what screen time was. We actually had a camera, but I very rarely ever got to see it used. I'm not that old either, by the way. In the amount of my lifetime, we have gone from typically kind of pretty simple living for most people, black and white TV, some of you, the 50s, the TV just came out, to now where children are walking around with the entire congressional library in their pocket. A connection to any piece of information. They are bombarded constantly with advertising. They are bombarded constantly with media. They are being constantly bombarded. They have to process in their brain massive amounts of information at every moment, at every day. The amount of information when I was a child I had to process, very little comparative to what it is now. Culturally, we're keeping up, we're surviving. Anthropologically, as far as our DNA and our body, we are not keeping up at all. And we're demanding so much more of our children that it's really hard for them to be able to keep going in this kind of society. So there are times we have to put a stop. We have to stay stop. So there's another a great theory that I really like, and this is the brain reset theory. And the brain research, which there's a lot of research on right now, says that 5 minutes in nature, every hour or every half an hour or every hour and a half, resets the brain and allows you to go deeper into focus. And we need to reset our brain. Our brain cannot just function constantly. It needs to be reset. Even if it's going over and watering a plant on the windowsill or going over and just breathing air. I'll give you another little bit of research that I thought was pretty profound. This research was done about 25 years ago, and it really keys right into this idea of the brain reset. And that is that Cabrini Green, which a lot of you will remember in Chicago as the projects that were built. This research was done in Cabrini Green. And the focus was on the kitchens in all the apartments. And the focus was on two parts of the kitchens. One was a kitchen that looked out on green space and a kitchen that didn't look out on green space. And what they found was that they found an 85% reduction in domestic violence in the kitchens that could see green space as against the kitchens that could not. And that for me was a pretty profound piece of research as well. Basically what it said to me that every time I see green space, it resets my brain. It gives my brain to have a break. And if my brain is not breaking, I'm just whirling myself into this emotional wreck constantly. So for your kids, especially with screen time, get them off the screen, get them in the garden, spring right now, walk around the block, just reconnect, reset their brain, and I can guarantee you they're going to get down to a lot more work, a lot more enjoyment in the work they're doing, and a lot more creative as far as their ability to be able to create. So I would love to kind of get a dialogue going because I've given you a lot of information and there's probably specifics that people may want to know. So is there any way we can set up a question and answer?
Yep, if people have questions, we can take a few more minutes to, you can unmute yourself and you can ask Geoffrey a question if you have something specific you'd like to know. I can start with one that came earlier in the chat. Was you were talking about not playing with your child, but allowing for independent play. And one of the participants asked, does that mean observing during independent play?
It's not even necessary for you can observe, but the reality is your kid probably doesn't want you looking at them. They want to be able to go off and do their own thing. I think the more your child plays by themselves, the more opportunity you get to do what you need to do, so that when you want to engage with your child and have family time, you have it. But if you're constantly engaged with your child, you're going to be craving your own time. These are times where you can go get your work done, go do the things that you need to do. Let your child be. There are going to be plenty of times when you are interacting with your child. You don't need to be observing your child. Let them be. They should be fine. Depending on how old. If they're like 1, there's concerns, things like that. But you can also set environments up fairly close to where you are that are independent environments that allow them to be able to do the things for themselves. But 4- and 5-year-olds should be able to play in their room for hours by themselves.
Geoffrey, I'm thinking, and I grew up very much like what you've described. I was one of 6 children. I wasn't out on a sheep farm, but grew up in the days of you come in when the street lights go on. And there were lots of older children around who were really the primary safety guards for whatever there might be. But the same question, if a child was outdoors, how might you guide somebody in terms of how to allow their child just to have open-ended play in a way that today's parent could feel was safe?
The change happened in the 70s and 80s, Stranger Danger, that really destroyed a lot of childhood. The reality is children are probably more safer now than they have ever been. One of the big differences between now and then was everyone watched over everyone's kids. Nowadays, we don't know our neighbors, and our neighbors are definitely not going to look after your kid for fear of being sued or being reprimanded. How dare you say anything to my child or whatever. So your outdoor environment has become fairly limited. If you send your 8-year-old kid down to the park, you're probably going to get arrested, which is really, really unfortunate, because kids, they're able to do this kind of stuff. So your backyard is probably a good spot. Or if you want to go down to the park, take something for yourself to do. This is a good opportunity for you to do some reading, or maybe if you've got some work you need to do on your laptop or whatever you go, take some time for yourself. Don't engage. Allow them, but you're there. They've got the freedom to do what they need to do. You're supervising, but you're not manipulating or organizing. You're just there. You're looking after them. You're being responsible. But you try not to engage with them. Allow them to do their own thing. Is probably the most important thing there. It is a challenge in that nowadays to be able to do a lot of this kind of stuff. Gone are the days of going up to the country to your grandparents' farm too. That was another way kids got to be outside and really enjoy being free. Like 2 days ago, I had one of my neighbors came up to see the farm. This 2.5-year-old on the farm was unbelievable. We were just chatting. She was chasing the chickens and hugging the turkeys and then running over and like sitting next to the sheep and reading to them. It was like, this is where kids need to be. This is what they need to be doing. 2.5-year-old, happy as Larry, totally independent. Anyone else with a thought?
We've kept them up past their kids' bedtimes and maybe past some of their bedtimes. But Geoffrey, this was really wonderful. Thank you, thank you, thank you for sharing your wisdom and ideas.
Somebody just asked how
Oh,
to
good.
how to engage with only children, single children. That's where you need to have a lot of materials creative, doing play groups. I know that's a little more difficult in the coronavirus situation, but having a lot of materials that they can construct and build for themselves. And in that single child, most of my play was by myself because my brothers were off doing their things, but I had a lot to engage me. It's really thinking about having materials and things to engage the child. They'll want to be with you. You have to, in some ways, build a wall around yourself a little bit so that they're not constantly with you. And that is by, in some ways, ignoring them a little bit so that they do go off and do their own thing. And then, but make sure you've got the materials and things that they need. So it's a little bit more of a challenge, a little bit more difficult, but you're going to do your single child an incredible service by allowing them to be self-motivating, self-creative, self-building. They'll be superstars at school because they'll be the leaders.
That is a great question. Good.
So thank you, everyone. I had a wonderful
Thank
evening.
you, Geoffrey.
Enjoy. Hopefully gained a little bit of inspiration, a little bit to help you during these interesting times, to be able to motivate your kids to be incredible young people when they grow up.
Yeah.
That was great. Thank you. That was a lot of ideas and a lot of inspiration. All right. Time to go play.
Good night, everyone.
No. Good night.
Now I have to go thank my older brother for feeding me a spoonful of dirt
See?
when I was a child.
I fed my sister dog food once.
And she's okay.
She turned out all right.
Yeah.
Thank you all for being
mud
with
pies
us.
we ate when we were little kids too, and
Yeah.
making
Yeah.
mud pies and mud soups and all of that. Worms.
Mm-hmm.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you, Anna.
Thank you, Geoffrey. That was great. I did, Geoffrey, I
Oh, yeah.
recorded this